Have you on board. And there's that little niggly sound reminding us that the recording this session is going to be recorded. I hope everybody is okay with that. If not, please do indicate in the chat in case there's an issue with that. Thank you everybody for joining us, for making time for this really important conversation. I know it's been a buzzword, it's been something that's been spoken about for a long time, but today we want to put some context to it and we want to involve in the conversation. So in case you're wondering, who is this lady chopping away? My name is Irene Okoye. I'm really passionate about empowerment of people in whatever level of sphere they're in. I want them to be successful and I want to support them in however I can. So I'm really glad to be hosting this conversation and I'm not doing it alone. So if you would like to participate, please feel free to drop something on the chat, tell us where you're joining us from, tell us which organization you present if you're happy to do so. And I will get to it. If you have any questions as we go along, please feel free to also post on the chat. But just to get us started, I'm just going to share my screen for a bit. I hope you can all see my screen. Really hoping that people can see my screen. Awesome, I got the thumbs up. So just a bit of housekeeping so that we all remember what we're here for and we respect each other as we go along. Please mute your mic as per the first prompt. This particular session is being recorded so that we can use it for other purposes and of course sharing with you. Keep your video off to improve your audio quality. So that's more for us and for you as well. So if you do have a question, like I said, please feel free to post on the chat. Again, introduce yourself if you'd like to on the chat. We would love to know who's in the room, who's joining us today. Tell us your name, your organization. If possible, you can rename yourself with your organization name. Use the chat feature for any questions. That's just to minimize any disruptions as we go along. Please, 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 we want to hear what you have to say about this particular topic. So feel free to use the chat to give us your insights, your thoughts, or to pose any questions to our panel today. Again, the recording will be available upon request. So if you'd like to receive a recording of this particular session, details will be posted shortly on how you can request for the recording to be made available to you. And just for context, and in case you're wondering who on earth is Dialogue and why are they hosting this particular conversation, we are no way affiliated to Dialogue Action SA, not in any way. We are an organization that's been working with leaders and organizations for over 22 years. We're passionate about working with people as individuals, looking at leaders and the skills that they need, especially in this very interesting time, what I call very disrupted times. So we work with them from a coaching perspective, whether we're working with their teams from a management development perspective, or simply just trying to diagnose issues in their companies and supporting them through our bespoke services. So at the end, and I'm sure my colleague Amanda will be posting on the chat how you can get involved or in touch with Dialogue as we go along. If you have any questions about our panelists, if you have any questions about Dialogue as a whole, or you want to understand what we do, please feel free to reach out to Amanda. Her details are going to be flashed there as well as on the chat. And in case you are on Google, because I know a lot of us are very, very, very tech savvy and you're probably on Google and you're looking out for our website, it's currently under development. We're not shoddy or shady in any way, I promise. It's just something that we are creating at the moment. All right, I hope we are still warm and thank you for everybody that's introducing themselves. Lovely to see Annaki's in the room, Yonita is in the room, Justin, and you know, keep your names coming through. Tell us where you're joining us from. We would love for you to be part of this conversation. And if there's any particular interest that you have in today's session, or just generally around ethics, please feel free to post that. We've also included our LinkedIn link. So unless you are social, then probably there's doubt about your organization. So we've tried to incorporate that into the chat. So feel free to reach out to us on LinkedIn and follow us if you'd like to. So just to get into it, I really find this particular topic interesting to me. mostly because if you give me a sec, I'm going to stop sharing my screen. This particular topic is really important, and I was thinking about it and I was prepping, thinking what could be an interesting segue into the conversation. And I don't know about you, but if you've spent a long time on Netflix, I'm not judging anybody, but during the last 2 years, a lot of us have spent a long time watching Netflix and catching up on series. I particularly enjoy Suits. I don't know if anybody has watched it, but if you have, please tell me your experience on the chat, whether you like the show. But anyway, there's Mike. You guys would know there's a Harvey Weinstein. Oh, I was about to say Weinstein, not that one, but there's a Harvey and there's Mike. So it's an interesting depiction of what the law firm does to try and circumvent the fact that Mike, who's one of the junior partners, does not have a law degree. And there's a lot of things that they do to try and cover that up. And sometimes I think about it, and I think about it in the context of ethics. Sometimes it's right, sometimes it's wrong. Where is that line? Where's the blurry line between when you're crossing the other line? You've gone beyond your ethics to protect somebody for all the right intentions. So that's the conversation today that I would like for us to be quite honest about times as leaders where we've got to a point where we don't know what to do. I was reading something on Deloitte when they were talking about, they have a white paper, really interesting white paper on disruption and ethics, and specifically focusing on technological disruption. And they talk about the fact that leaders today don't have a playbook that they can reference going back to, oh, this was ethical back in the day. I can still practice that. We're living in such disrupted times that we have to move along. And again, it lends itself to the question that we posed on our LinkedIn page, where we asked, why is it so difficult for people to lean in, pause for a minute and make the decisions? And a lot of you indicated that the decisions are complex, the issues are complex. And today I'm hoping that we can demystify some of those issues. And our panel today is going to help me do that. Between these two wonderful ladies that I've got to know for a while, there is over 40 years of experience. There's a lot of learning that they've done with leaders, and I'm really excited to be learning from them and hearing their experiences as well. So I'll start before all of you think that the session is about me. No, it's not really. I'll start with Thuli. If you could just introduce yourself and just talk about your experience in, ethics or just people development.
Thank you, Irene. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our session. I'm very delighted to have you with us this morning. My name is Machulwani Mshe, but my call name is Thuli. Everybody knows me as Thuli. I'm an executive coach and I'm a consultant. My background is in HR, call it human capital if you like. I've been in this space for over 20 years in senior positions, so it's longer than that. I have, had roles as executive manager, general manager, HR director in multiple sectors, included but not limited to banking, to retail, and aviation. And I consider myself, I'm passionate about talent management, about people development, about mentoring, about coaching. I also consider myself a business person, who specializes in HR, because for me to have impactful HR interventions, I really need to understand the business. So it is through my commercial acumen that I've had opportunities to act in positions of CEO for South African Airways, and also CEO for South African Airways Express.
Pretty interesting, and I know some questions are bubbling under about SAA, but we'll pause on SAA today and we'll get back to that. Thuli, I'm just very curious about what drives you to work with people. People are complex in how, by sheer nature of the fact that we're always evolving. What drives you? Why are you passionate about this?
I'm passionate about this because I really am passionate about empowering and supporting individuals to step into their power, to become the greatest versions of themselves.
Wow, I could never put it any better. Speaking about people, helping people step into the best version of themselves, I have to say this is my executive coach, and I'm really, really happy that we get to do this together. Lizanne, I would love for you to introduce yourself better than I have, of course.
Thank you. Very proud to be your coach, Irene. Hi, everybody. I'm Lizanne Brooke. I'm a transformative facilitator and a thinking partner to people that are making change. And I work with organizations. I've been part of Dialogue for the last 20 years. And I come from a background, I've always worked with people, both in the development sector and also in working with talent, in recruitment. And my passion has always been this belief, it comes from this belief I have that we can make a difference and that we live in times when we really need to make a difference. And I've always been driven to reach the next level of decision making that prevents that difference from being made. And I'm very driven to be involved in business. I coach at executive level. I work with teams that are making change, that are wanting to transform, not just make the change for the sake of change, but to make it transformative. And I believe that the impact business has is very, very powerful. And I want to play a role in helping people to align with who they really are so that they can make decisions that have positive impact in our world at all levels. And I think that that's the role that business can play. And I'm driven to really support people to make those differences to the best of their ability.
Absolutely. I love that. Especially right now, and I'm going to use this term very often, disrupted times, so please do forgive me, but I think, you know, people are trying to anchor themselves and find themselves within their businesses as well as help others. So I think the role that you both play is quite important, especially right now. I just want to get into why this conversation is relevant. Why are we talking about ethics now? Is it just a nice to have? Is it something, is it becoming more of an imperative for businesses to embrace ethics and to think about it in context of disruption? So I'll start with you, Thuli. Why is this conversation important?
Mute. You're mute.
I was also on mute, hey? So we were both on mute. So Thuli, go for it.
This conversation is quite important and very critical because in the last 2 years in South Africa, South Africa has been exposed to the Zondo Commission. And in the Zondo Commission, we have been exposed to the rampant corruption, fraud, malfeasance that has happened across private and public sector and individuals and private individuals and small companies and big organizations. So the last 2 years have really brought an awakening and realizations that ethics are really core to running of business and cannot really be compromised. Some big firms that we know of, that we're not going to mention, have been disgraced and brought into disrepute, with results that some of them had out of business, and some of them are struggling to come back up and really have been, their reputation have been compromised. Some had to pay fines and some had to return the revenues that they had earned through unethical practices. So for me, this has brought ethics into the boardroom and into really the core of the business. It is a very important and a new way of doing business. It is organizations that demonstrate and that will demonstrate the highest ethical code that will become the service providers and employers of choice for their customers, for the employees, and for their markets.
Yeah, thanks for that, Thuli. I want to come back to your personal experience, especially having sat at the Zondo Commission, but I just want to, pose the same question to Lizanne. Why is this conversation so important, especially in your experience of working with leaders? Why should we think about it? Why should we talk about it?
For me, it's always been an important question, but it's particularly important now because people are grappling with their own morals versus the corporate ethics that they are being held accountable for. And there is so much change going on, as you say, disruption, our favorite word. There's so much disruption happening, and we're not really sure where it's coming from or what it's coming from. And our core is what enables us to navigate that to the best of our ability. And if our core is not ethical, it leaves us at risk of so much. And I'm working with people that are in situations where they are having to challenge their own sense of morals while they're making decisions. So that's the one side. On the other side, we've been so sensitized over the last few years with all this going on, all this access to information, we've become quite conscious of binary ways of thinking. We've become very informed about what's going on. Everything's under threat. We've got a war, our environment is under threat. We've got all sorts of issues happening on all sorts of different levels. That's just naming two. And we are being expected to take a stand. Because we're more informed, we're looking around us, we're expecting the organizations, governance, etc., to reflect some of that information and take stands on some of these things. And that's not an easy thing to do in a very complex reality, particularly when, as an organization, ethics is actually going to start more and more relating to our reputation as well as our attention of our people. And it's got this kind of double thing that we need to be taking into account. If we take a stand and we take a stand in the wrong place, we're putting ourselves at risk. And if we don't take a stand, we're also putting ourselves at risk. And there's this new negotiation and navigation that has to happen. And it's not a one size fits all, and there's not a map, and it's not business as usual. And so that's quite a difficult place to be navigating. And I think we need a lot of support and a lot of open conversation around that to ensure that we use this time constructively, because I think there's a lot that can go wrong as well as a lot that can go right.
Yeah, I really love that. Something that I wanted to pose is, you've spoken about it, you just touched on it a little bit, but I want to double tap on it. Is there a difference between being morally correct and being ethical? Is there a thin line? Is it the same thing?
Do you want me to answer that one?
Yes, I'll start with you, and then I'll pose the same question to Thuli. Yes.
Well, for me, morals are a more personal choice. They're what we believe, what we choose to stand for. Whereas ethics are the rules and the definition from a cultural perspective or from the organization's perspective. So it has a moral implication, but it's more the structure that you follow. So if your morals are slightly out of alignment, which I think a lot of people have been used to, well, this isn't really what I think, but this is what happens in business. That used to be acceptable. More and more, that's starting to get very blurred, because we have come to expect businesses to represent what we believe in. If we're going to invest in businesses, if we're going to give our time or our money to businesses, we want them to be more aligned with our morals. We don't want them to be taking stands on things that we're completely opposed to. So I think there's a blurred line, and I'm certainly not a language expert, but I see morals as being a personal expression and ethics as being the sort of the construct around how to behave within that space.
And just before I come to Thuli, I just want to remind the participants, please feel free to give us your opinion. I would love to know what your take is on between, ethics and morality. Is it the same thing? I still want to pose that question to you. So please feel free to, ask your questions. I can see a couple of questions coming in the chat, and I will take them at some point through the session. But Thuli, coming back to you, do you see morality, let me say, what is moral versus what is ethics as the same thing?
Yes, it's quite a tricky one, but my take is that your ethical behavior is informed and influenced by your morality. And when you operate in a context where you have other people, that's like an ethical code, there is an acceptable behavior that one has to operate within the sphere of. So if you are in a working environment, and I support what Lizanne has said, your morals are your personal. However, when your personal is brought into a more common space, a more public space, your ethics have to comply and align with what's happening with an environment that you're operating in. And then the tightrope that Lizanne was referring to also, it brings in a dilemma to a lot of individuals where your moral, your ethics are in direct contradiction with the ethics of an organization. And I think that's most of the time where we find ourselves in, or we have found ourselves in, and as part of what has been exposed that has been happening in corporate South Africa.
Wow, you're bringing in such an interesting point. And I just want to double tap again, just going back on that. Thanks, Justin, for that question, and Ali as well, and Damien, I've seen those questions, thank you. I just want to double tap back on who is the cupbearer, if you would allow me to use that term, when it comes to ethics in an organization. So scrap everything that we hear. Ethics is great. Ethics needs to be practiced. But where does it start? Who sits with that mandate in a company? Tuli, I'll ask you to take that.
The card bearer or the torch bearer for ethics in an organization is the leader, is the CEO. And of course, the CEO doesn't work alone. There's got the executive team, and executive team have got teams. But the most important thing is what the leader does in an organization. And often people talk about ethics, leaders talk about ethics, but their behavior is not aligned or consumerate to ethics. So if you are a leader and you talk ethics, but you behave in an ethical manner, you can be guaranteed that your organization is going to behave in an ethical manner. So it's quite important. You know, there's a saying, people say it mostly flippantly to say the fish rots from the head. And if the leader is unethical, you can be guaranteed that the organization is going to be swaying more on the behaviors that they see. So without belaboring the point, it's quite important that leaders have to be the torch bearers and the card bearers for ethics in an organization.
Absolutely. I don't know if you want to add something to that, Lizanne.
I completely agree with that. And I just think that quite often ethics is placed almost as a sideline in terms of it's part of compliance, or there's go and speak to the people that have got the paperwork kind of sense. And I think that sometimes leadership underestimates how much information people actually have about what is really going on. There's the formal version, and then there's what everyone else knows is happening. And how really destructive that can be when there is a dissonance between what we profess to be and what we actually are. And that's not just the individual as a leader, that's the entire team, that's the what we put out in the market, and what we actually choose to prioritize in our decision making tells a story. And if it is not aligned at leadership level, it really, really does impact downwards. And yeah, so I agree. I think leadership needs to take ethics very seriously. And I think that it should be conversations that are happening now. It's not something for compliance to work out. It's a conversation we need to be having. What do we as a leadership team stand for? What are we going to do about this? How do we feel? Where are we moving? How are we prioritizing? Those conversations, I think, should really be happening now while there's so much disruption going on, because we're really at a risk of destabilizing or being destabilized if we're not clear. And it's one of those things that doesn't feel like an urgent priority sometimes. But if we're not clear on that, as the urgent priority hits us, we've got no ground to stand on, and everybody's watching, and people watch very critically. Yeah, and so I think it's an important time to be clear about it now and to discuss how we are evolving ethically.
That's such a great point. Hey, it's not something for compliance and HR department. It actually needs to become an imperative for the entire business, and it starts from the leadership. So I'm just going to switch gears a little bit. I'm quite curious about, and we promised that this session will be very practical and be very experiential. So I just want to go back to Tuli, and maybe if you could just delve into your experience of having, sat in the Zondo Commission and what precipitated, and, areas in your life where you've had to balance that tightrope of, being ethical and really standing, and what that looked like for you in practice.
Yes, what led me to go and give testimony at the Zondo Commission is as a result of my experience at my previous employer, and it's quite amazing how the ethics of an organization can be influenced in a negative way so very quickly over a very short space of time. Hence, I still say that leadership is quite important in making sure that they lead by example and making sure that take everyone along with, but that has to be done really by practicing it, by showing it, by demonstrating it. For me, it started as as an HR executive, I was also a permanent invitee to a human resources committee, a board subcommittee called sometimes REMCO, Remuneration and Nominations Committee. So in the board changed, and we had a new board. In that board meeting, I started getting instructions from the board. And just to give you context, the board's supposed to have an oversight in an organization as to how things are going, implementation of the organizational structure and organizational strategy. So not the structure, I beg your pardon, of the organizational strategy. So as an HR executive accompanying my CEO in the meetings, I start getting instructions that were directly linked to operations of what we're supposed to be doing. And at the end of the meeting, I would go to my boss and say to my boss, I didn't hear you make a comment, but I think what was required of us is it's really unethical. I just put it bluntly. I said it's interference into the operations of the organization, and I expect as the leader to be directing the board and highlighting that the stepping into area which is your responsibility as a CEO. I mean, some of the just examples that I can give is, a board member will say, I want you to amend your organizational structure and create a position. And once you've created a position, I have an individual that I want you to employ and place into that position. So I would say, for me, it was just, natural to say, no, there's a process that we need to go through in terms of having to change organizational structure. And once we've changed organizational structure through the right processes within the organization, then if it is a position that's available, that position needs to be advertised. It needs to be open because that's a policy of the organization, to be open, to be transparent about vacancies that are available within the organization. So I found myself that it kept on going, and I kept on going to my leader, and my leader says, well, you just have this is in your area of responsibility. You then deal with it directly. So I then, continue to go to these meetings and continue to talk to the board. And I took an approach of, I'm going to educate, and I'm going to share, and in a very humble manner, I would say, in terms of the policy, this is what needs to happen. And we need to align with our policies, and our policies are approved by the board. So we cannot have the board not complying or aligning with the company's policies. And I felt that at some stage, I didn't have the support that I needed from my immediate boss. So, and I can give you a lot of examples that it is a number of them. I mean, the most ridiculous one was when somebody arrived at reception looking for me. When I go to the reception, the person says, I've been sent here by a board member to start in a position and that you are aware of. This person rocks up from nowhere, comes to the reception, they have their handbag, they're ready to start a job, And I had to say, excuse me, I'm sorry, this is not how we work here. Please go back, and I will have to deal with this matter, and then we'll revert back to you. Give us your contact details. We will come back to you as soon as this matter is being resolved. And it goes to a point of that direct interference of saying, I need you to discipline. Discipline, it's an operational matter. It's a line manager's responsibility. I need you to discipline this person. I need you to, says, how do you discipline this person without any allegations of misconduct? And how can, if ever there are any allegations are coming down from the board instead of coming down from a line manager, or being cascaded down from the board to the CEO to the direct line manager? So it was that kind of interference that appoint this one, fire this one, create this structure, employ this one. People will be in a bar and saying, oh, I think this person will be good at doing this job. Phone Julie, can you please make sure that you make space for this person, because I think this person, it's good. And then the sad part was it was gravitating on the point of transformation. So hiding under transformation. It's a Black person. It's a skilled Black person. The skilled Black person obviously should be employed. Yes, you are right. But the skilled Black person should be involved should be employed following due process. We cannot just be rampant about it just because you are designated or you're a Black person, you're skilled, you just need to be employed rapidly. And then when I was then appointed as acting CEO, it just got worse. It just got worse. It then moved into the space of supply chain, the space of tenders, just in a common language, receiving instruction. I mean, the one morning I arrive at work and I open my laptop, and here's a letter of award, awarding a tender coming from a board member, asking me to sign the letter of award and handing over to that individual. In that letter of award is the amounts that are going to be paid, amounts that have been agreed with this service provider. And then, I stopped. You said, are we so busy that we need to post? I've always posted. I've always posted. Despite the pressure that I've experienced, I've always posted. I post, I look at it and say, this doesn't look right. First, I call the Chief Procurement Officer. Chief Procurement Officer, has there been a tender on this matter, on this issue? And where's the paperwork? What has happened? Chief Procurement Officer will say, no, we haven't had that tender. First time we hear about it. And then I'll go back and says, I have done my homework, I have checked, this has not gone through our process. And this is irregular that you have a board member writing an award for a service provider, the work that's supposed to be, the tender supposed to be done through an organization, and is supposed to have gone through the process. And I even asked the Chief Procurement Officer to say, is this person in our database? They checked, it says this person is not even in our database. So I then have to go back to the board member and say, with due respect, this cannot happen. This is what has I've come up with. I've done my homework. I've checked this. This is it cannot be done. It's not in line with the policies, processes in the company. And then I get an instruction that you are here to take instructions from the board. In case you don't understand your role as an acting CEO, you are here to take instructions from the board. I said, yes, you are absolutely right. But I am not here to take illegal, unethical instructions from the board. So there's been numerous experiences, including having to change a tender that was awarded through a full process, due process, through the tender process, approved, and I had to sign it, the award, with the Chief Procurement Officer and the company given the award. Once the board was aware of that, I was then instructed to cancel that an award, which has already been issued to the company, to cancel it, not only just cancel it, to cancel it and award to another company, which is not even met the minimum requirements. They had applied for the tender, but they didn't even meet the minimum requirement just because that company was a subsidiary of my previous, the company that I worked for. So I found myself under tremendous pressure. However, I've always said, even amidst that pressure, and with the pressure came the threats that I will never do something wrong, knowing that it is wrong. And I've always said, you know, I'm human, I will make mistakes. And however, doing something that is wrong, knowing that it is wrong, was something that I was not prepared to do, irrespective of the consequences that flowed from there. I was just not prepared. I was not prepared to compromise my integrity. I was not prepared to ruin my reputation. That, you know, reputation is something that you just acquire over a month. It's something that you acquire over a period of time as a professional. And I was not prepared to compromise my ethics, my morality, and my reputation.
Wow,
I don't know if you want me to add more. We can sit here the whole day.
I know. And I'm sure that there'd be a lot of questions specifically on your experience and of course your time at SAA. But I do want to just bring in the audience a little bit. There's actually a really great, there's a lot, I just want to say there's a lot of great comments that are coming through, but there's one that I want to just highlight right now, which I think in a way illustrates what I would consider courage, because that's what I'm listening to your story and all I hear is courage. And Michael Gardner actually puts it really nicely. I think even in organizations that have suffered from ethical collapse, the majority of employees are generally moral and ethical, but fail to be courageous when required. Courage isn't a reckless disregard for safety, but the result of weighing risk and reward. Therefore, I would be keen to hear some guidance on how organizations can enhance incentives for ethical behavior, enhance incentives for unethical behavior, and empower individuals to speak truth to power. Wow, Michael, that's brilliantly put. I'm going to pose that question to Lizanne. What can organizations do to reward courage for ethical behavior, and of course, basically provide a carrot, you know, towards a behavior that they would like to be perpetuated in the company, versus how to dissuade people from, I don't want to say use a stick, but basically use a stick to ensure that people are at least, you know, in a way guided towards what's right.
I think it's a pretty loaded question, and because there are nuances, but I really think that Michael starts from the right place, which is this recognizing that most people are actually wanting to act in ways that are ethical and moral. And we quite often start from the idea of how do we punish the baddies, rather than how do we support and create the space for courage and for questioning. And I think that there's a lot of layers to that. So firstly, the individuals do need the courage, and it can be, I'm not particularly marketing myself here, but I do think that coaching helps, honestly, because you need an ally, you need someone who's in your camp, you need someone who can really help you interrogate what you're doing, support you as you take steps to take courageous actions. So whether that is a formal coach or whether that is some allies is always a useful aspect. But from a leadership perspective, Thuli mentioned processes and protocols, which I think are a really important backup. And why I say that is quite often when people are maneuvering in unethical ways, they are bypassing processes and protocols. And they are relying on the fact that most of us may not have the courage to stand up to that. And when you can consistently put in place certain processes and call someone on something very simple. I worked with someone a while ago who had a very senior person that he needed to expose him for very unethical behavior. And he couldn't do it because every time he took it to the board supported the person. And so what he did was he set up processes that took him 2 years of meticulous process work. And then he caught that person based on those processes, and that person was eventually jailed. But it was a long game. It was a persistent game. It was very pernickety. It needed processes. That's one approach. The other is to really ensure within an organization that there is room for voice, to have these discussions way before they get to the edge, to have a place where it is considered normal to discuss, to debate. What are our policies based on? Are they ethical? What do we need to change? Do we need to evolve now that this and this and this is happening in the world? Those kinds of conversations are really important because they start that process. Then to make sure that when someone speaks up, it is heard and taken seriously and not bypassed, which sometimes happens, in fact, quite often. And then when someone transgresses, it must be very clear. It must just be a unquestioning act. Sorry, this is wrong right here. So there's this kind of setting up an expectation of consistency, of discussion, of being able to support courageous behavior, of supporting each other, and of acting quite quickly when things go wrong. And I see someone said "and" in the chat. I'm not sure what that "and" means, but feel free to add.
Yeah, I just want to go back to you, Thuli, and I want to talk about, I think we've seen in this country particularly, just moving out of the micro to macro, and we've seen, you know, the way whistleblowers have been treated. You know, there isn't enough protection. There's been a lot of issues around how, even at organizational level, how we protect those whistleblowers. And I think it just lends to the question on courage and how to reward these affirm positive behavior. And I'm just wondering, what practical things can, you know, leaders in this particular forum do to ensure that they're protecting not necessarily whistleblowers, but people who are taking that courageous step to do the right thing, to say, oh no, I will not compromise myself or the organization in this particular way.
Thank you, Irene. If you allow me, I just want to add on the question that you had asked Lizanne of, you know, practically, how do you encourage people and in terms of being courageous in an organization? And so one of the things that I think it's important is to have a code of ethics. And that code of ethics needs to be communicated to everyone else within the organization. And that code of ethics needs to be intertwined and interwoven into all the processes that we do, into decision-making, because often it's in decision-making that then we fall through sometimes in terms of ethical conduct. So whatever decisions that we do, we should always be asking ourselves, is it in line with our ethical code? And we should have, you know, ethics champions within organizations. I know some organizations have got those ethics champions. If you have those ethics champions, it is easy for an individual, like Lizette mentioned, that you need a community that you feel safe with, that you will have courage to go and speak to. However, nothing beats like the organization that commits to ethical behavior to a point of the zero tolerance to unethical behavior. So if everyone is aware, even if it's there, it can be reviewed, it can be and always and redone, and people need to know about it on a practical basis, and it needs to be measured as well. And leaders need to be measured on ethics in the same way as leaders are measured on finances, are measured on customer, are measured on managing people. Leaders need to be measured on ethical behavior within their teams, within the organization. And in terms of the whistleblower, generally in organizations, you have a whistleblower line where individuals can and phone anonymously and then can report these matters. And then independent people and in some organizations, some audit firms are responsible for the lines, the whistleblower lines for the organization. So it's not meant within the organization. However, in my previous organization, we had an ethics whistleblower line, and that whistleblower line used to go to one of the board members who was the chair of audit and risk and compliance before it could go to an independent party. And guess what used to happen? The whole process fell flat because then the whistleblowing never used to go through to where it's supposed to have gone. Instead, people stopped whistleblowing because people started being victimized for that process. So there's pros and cons, and organizations that are serious about protecting the employees and upholding the ethics in the organization needs to make sure that the processes are so tight that there's external parties that are manning this, and that the leaders within the organization will have the courage to take and make the right decisions and have zero tolerance to that. As far as the experience, more and more of whistleblowers, more and more organizations now are becoming aware. I was classified as a whistleblower. I never had any protection. I lost my job because with what happened is then, they start having frivolous allegations of misconduct, and the whole system is corrupted. And then in the end, you lose your job. My career was cut short. I lost my job. And however, if that process was protected, it will have come up with a different result. So it's important that organizations that are serious about ethics should make sure that they cover that, should make sure that they protect the whistleblowers, should make sure that the whistleblowers are protected within the organizations and are not victimized. Not only that, the lives of whistleblowers, as we know now, we're in danger, are in danger. Personally, I also had threats to my life. And there's some people that I know, their lives were threatened and they were followed home and followed to wherever. So that is still quite important. In the Zondo report, there is recommendations about what organizations needs to do about the whistleblowers. There is an organization at the moment that is formed and not-for-profit organization that support whistleblowers, but it's not anything that is official. Some countries have got organizations and processes and support whistleblowers. That's why the Zondo Commission is advocating for South Africa as a country to make sure that you have those processes coming from the top, from the company. So what discourages people from having courage? Because they see what happens to other people who are victimized. People are working sometimes not because of self-actualization. People are working to earn a living and to have a livelihood to support their families. So if that livelihood is going to be threatened by you whistleblowing, by you highlighting an unethical behavior, you have a risk. And how many people will have the courage to say, despite, and I will stand by doing what I think is correct. I will stand by whistleblow. The Zondo report highlights on a section on this previous company that I worked for, and it highlighted, it's in the report, that as soon as, and please, I'm not making a pitch for myself, I'm just relating the facts. As soon as they managed to get rid of me at that company at that time, corruption became wholesale in that organization. So it takes courage, and I'm saying courage is also a road less traveled. So instead of having to have people sitting and being scared, we need those communities within organizations of making sure that there's processes in place, making sure that we have champions, you have people feel safe that they can and raise these issues. The example that Lizanne has mentioned, it had to take someone 2 years to be able to raise and highlight and actually expose someone who's been involved in unethical and corrupt practices within an organization. It shouldn't be that.
Wow, Thuli, we can have this conversation all day. I'm really loving this, and our time is going, but I still have two. I'm going to take about 2 audience questions, but I wanted to double tap on something that you've just spoken about, because we don't want anybody to leave this session feeling like we have romanticized the whole idea of ethics and courage being easy. They're not. And we were just really, in fact, I was having a conversation with a few friends of mine on the weekend where we were talking about how Netflix pulled out of Russia just as an ethical decision until, Russia and Ukraine, I don't want to say sort out their business, but until there's peace in that particular part. And what's really happened to the company is they've been punished in the market by pulling out of the Russian market. You can see the kind of, result it has had on, other than just losing market share, it has also influenced how much they're making as a company. So it's the first time in 10 years, we're talking about a decline in Netflix stocks, which is pretty interesting. So it's not always as easy, and it's, courage, as you said, is a less traveled road. So thanks for that. I just want to take one audience question, and 2 actually. Lizanne, I'll pose this to you. It's a question from Justin, and Justin is asking, sorry, just gonna find it. I had it for a minute. I like that, Mauji. Courage is being responsive to conscience. I love that. That's lovely. So this is a question around, should ethics change and evolve? Can we influence them?
I think the answer is yes, that it needs to. I think that while there are principles that we probably are universal ethical principles, I think that it's very important that let me just step back a little bit. What Thuli's been speaking about speaks so much to why it's important right now. We are so aware of so many ethical gaps, if you like, in what is going on around us. And the power dynamics in the past have made it very difficult, and they continue to make it very difficult. And speaking truth to power is not something that necessarily comes easily. It takes courage. Mm-hmm. And yet, for the first time, maybe not the first time, but we're so aware there is so much going on that is starting to directly hit the bottom line of conventional business priorities, that the influence of ethics is starting to make itself felt on the bottom line. And the influence of decisions, your example of Netflix, there's an example of you feel your decision has a bottom line impact. In the same way, not taking action, and I know this is a simplistic example, but for example, Shell and blasting at the Wild Coast. It makes people aware. It makes people aware for a short time. It doesn't necessarily make a big difference to the bottom line always, but it can. When Ronaldo didn't want to drink Coca-Cola, it bottomed out their shares very quickly. We're living in a time where we actually don't know. We don't know if we stand for Russia or against Russia, if we stand for vaccinations or against vaccinations. Which is it that our company must? We don't know which way the world is going. In January, to have a client, if you were based in the City of London, to have clients that paid you from the Virgin Islands, brilliant, fantastic, you're doing well. In February, if those clients were Russian, you were under suspicion with the FBI. There was no leeway. And so I think that this thing about ethics evolving is exactly why we're having this conversation now, is that there's not a definite yes or no. There's not a definite right or wrong. There's not a clear set of how an organization must do this, but there is an urgent need for conversation and for alliance and alignment around this can affect our bottom line. It can affect our organization and can affect our organizational reputation. It can make a huge difference to whether our talent stays or goes. We need to be talking about this at a level that is not just about a big theory or the detail of what we put in the compliance report. There's a whole spectrum in between, and that's where we need to be evolving from.
Fantastic. Thanks for that. And thank you for sticking with us, all the participants here. We really appreciate your time. I haven't come to an end. I still want to take one question. So this was from Atata. She's asking about the fact that we spoke about ethics being led from the top, but she's asking what other ways can core ethics be driven from the bottom up? So I'll give that to Thuli, and maybe Lizanne, you could add to that as well.
Okay. I mentioned that you need to create a community and community of ethics coach, sorry, not coaches, you know, my life is about coaching, ethics champions. Together with that, you need to align to have your values, because your ethics form part of the values within the organization. So if you have your values champions, you have your ethics champions, you form a community within the organization. And that it's then bottom up. And that is how we call ourselves and we hold ourselves accountable. And I also mentioned that ethics needs to be measured, you know, from leadership. If we make decisions and we make big decisions, it just always needs to be measured against, does it align with our values? Is it ethical? So if we have a bottom-up approach, it's even better. But the driver, I'm not saying it's not important. The bottom-up approach, it creates a critical mass in the organization. However, for it to be more sustainable, you need leadership to be able to driving it. Otherwise, the bottom-up approach is pushing up against the pressure, which might be opposite from the leadership. So for it to be really, really sustainable, you need the bottom-up approach and the top-down approach. Then you have an organization that's in synergy and looking at the same things and protecting the same things and making sure. The biggest thing is to make sure that ethics, we mentioned earlier on to say ethics, it's not compliance. Ethics is in the fabric and interwoven into the culture of the organization. It's how we speak, it's how we do things, how we take decisions, how we recruit people, how even when you fire people, it's how we fire people. So ethics becomes who we are. It's just that, you know, you can't take a fabric of a finely interwoven tapestry. It's how you have to. It has to be part and parcel of who you are as an organization, what you do, what you say. And, you know, like values, values are not the poster at the reception. Values are what you say and do. Ethics are what you say and do. And top, bottom, and bottom up, it's the right way of doing it, integrating it, not seeing it in isolation.
I think you've just put that so beautifully with the idea of that's what it means to bring it to the core. It's not an externalized theoretical thing. It's becoming integrated and in alignment with our values and our principles. Beautifully put.
Yeah, as we move closer to the end, I just want to ask, so for any leader that's joined the session today, is there, you know, a practical step, let's make it 2 practical steps that they can make today to advance the ethics in the organization or the ethical practices within the organization? And I'll start with you, Lizanne.
For me, one of the principles would be to be very open to conversation, to start having these conversations, to make it something that becomes living and is not just an hour on a Wednesday morning, but is actually something that you start having conversations about on a regular basis. And then really living into your practice yourself as a leader, being aware that you are critical to how things play out in the organization.
Well put, well put. Thuli, what would you advise a particular leader?
To add to what Lizanne had said, it is also about having within the leadership and also from the board, having a board member who is an ethics champion, you know, having one of the EXCO members who's an ethics champion, so that for me, it's also, I'm over repeating it, but it's about having that community within the organization, opening up the environment, having an environment where people are encouraged to come forward, you know, in the same way as people are encouraged to bring ideas, innovative ideas, people should be encouraged within those communities to talk about ethics, how they affect us. And also, ethics are evolving. What was ethical a couple of years ago, it's not ethical now. Lizette mentioned the issue of a company in the Virgin Islands who was dealing, as a Russian-based company or supplying Russians. Today, that has changed. It's not ethical anymore. Chelsea, my favorite European club, he's being sold right now because the owner of Chelsea is Russian, and the British people are in suspicions that he is friends with the Russian president. So the ethics are evolving all the time, and having those open conversations that Lizanne was referring to say, is this now something new, something that we need to look at? So ethics are dynamic, and we want a leader to encourage disruption. Have a look at, how do we change this? How do we embrace and make things different? How do we talk about what could possibly, we also need to be proactive, could become an ethical dilemma, which is maybe not necessarily an ethical dilemma today. So it's quite important that we have to have those conversations. It's quite important. It gives comfort and it gives courage to an employee if they know that they have a board member who's a champion of ethics, they have an executive who's a champion of ethics, they have a senior manager who is a champion of ethics. It's about creating that critical mass of ethical champions within the organization.
Absolutely. Ladies and gentlemen, I am very, very happy that we've come. I'm not happy that we've come to the end of this discussion, but we've had such an, for me, it was very eye-opening, inspiring, and I hope you feel inspired or challenged to do something within your organization. Thank you so much for spending your morning with us. And to our panel, thank you for sharing your heart, sharing your experience. I really appreciate it. And if you want to keep up with the conversation, or you want to continue, or you want to understand what practical things you could do with your organization, we've just posted contact details. You can get in touch with us on LinkedIn, of course, and of course, there's an email address from Amanda. Thank you very much for joining us. It's been a pleasure, and yeah, see you on the next one.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Thank you.